Well, let's take a look real quickly at how we would build a list iterator object. Again, we'll assume that we have an LST object of that name, an object of that name built from the array list, and it's of type list. Again, recall back to lesson 42, I believe, in which the list interface had a method called list iterator. It returns a list iterator object. And we would then say itr.remove, itr.previous, any of those legal method names. Well, let's look at something a bit unusual. A very unusual way to do something with a for loop when you're stepping through a list, an iterator, using an iterator. Look at this. We've never seen anything quite like this before. We have our three parts. This one makes sense. Has next. So that's a control thing. That's a Boolean. Always will be a Boolean in that middle part of a for loop. Is it safe to keep looping? This and this are identical. This starts us off, well, at the beginning, you're at the start of iterating through the beginning of a list, and it would be appropriate to start with the 0th index, which that'll do. And this will just increment you to the next one. So it's very straightforward code, actually, and then inside we would do something with that iterator and manipulate the data. Let's talk about some of the pitfalls of using generics or type parameters with an iterator. Take a look at this example right here. Now notice I built this object that's of array list type using the string here. It's our type parameter, string. We're restricted to only putting strings in there. And so I'm legal right here. I put a string in, I put another string in, and then I build an iterator, just like we've showed you just above. Now, we have to cast, because we're using an iterator to get at this. See, this would normally return us our string, but remember what's stored in a list. Object type objects. Yeah, encapsulated in them is the real object that you have, in this case a string, but they're nevertheless object type objects, and you must cast it in order to store it in your string over here. But there's a way around it. Let's look at the same code again. This is identical. The first lines of code, in fact, are identical. But there's something different here. What is happening here? When we build the iterator object, we build it with a type parameter. And when you do that, it knows that it's safe, that only strings are stored there, and so when you use the iterator with .next to retrieve your object, in this case you do not have to cast it, and you can store it directly into your string. So that's just a good thing to do, because nearly always you have the same type object stored in these lists, and so just make your type parameter whatever is stored there, and it'll make life easier for you. Now here's some warnings. Now you better pay attention to this, because this will get you in trouble. You typically only want to have one iterator or list iterator alive at one time, modifying or fooling around with a list. It's if you have two of them, they're going to get confused. It probably won't crash, but it'll get confused, and there's no telling what kind of shape your data in your list is going to be in when you get through. It probably will not be what you think it's going to be. unexpected things will happen. So the moral of this is only have one iterator or a list iterator at a time that you're using against the list. Otherwise, you will get yourself in some serious trouble and corrupt your data.